All right, we turn to Wall Street now, where the Dow dips on the possibility this could be our last interest rate cut of the year. The central bank today lowered rates by a quarter point. Economists expected that cut, but what really has Wall Street talking is Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell's message on the path forward.
In the committee's discussions at this meeting, there were strongly differing views about how to proceed in December. A further reduction in the policy rate at the December meeting is not a foregone conclusion. Far from it. Policy is not on a preset course.
Let's bring in CBS News MoneyWatch correspondent Kelly O'Grady live at the New York Stock Exchange. Kelly, let's break down that message from Powell and the reaction from the traders on the floor behind you.
Not a foregone conclusion, Jules. That was not a welcome phrase that investors heard today. And in fact, the second that Chair Powell said that, you know, I always like to put up the Dow when he's talking because it moves quite viscerally. You started to see a sell-off. Now, we ended off session lows. You know, we did come back up, still obviously in the red. I've got all the major indexes over here to my left. But the concern is that we aren't going to get that rate cut that everyone was betting on, especially after the last meeting when the Fed released projections that they expected 2 more rate cuts, including today's, by the end of the year. The 2 things that really stuck out to me is, one, up until this point, you know, they felt okay with the delay in economic data from the government shutdown, but that was part of the driver of why there may be no change in the interest rate come December when they meet again. Powell said it's like driving through a fog when you don't have that information. Of course, it will only get worse if the government shutdown continues on for much longer, because remember, it's not just delayed reports, it's the fact that further data for these months is not being actively collected. The other thing was this question about the labor market. I mean, he admitted that inflation is still a concern, that they are seeing rising prices, but the labor market weakness is really where they are focusing, and that's a big reason why they decided to make that cut today. He was asked at one point about all of the layoffs that you and I have been talking about this week, right? Amazon, UPS, a number of other companies, and he said they're watching it very, very closely because in the absence of that government data, it's things like what is happening in the private sector, these anecdotes, these announcements that they're really watching. And so I think it was a little bit more newsmaking than I normally hear from Powell. He's very always, we're going to wait and see, very measured. But investors, of course, reacting pretty viscerally while he spoke today.
Okay, well, let's take a look at our interactive heat map. NVIDIA shares popped today on news the chip maker just became the world's first ever $5 trillion company. So to help put the numbers in perspective, it's roughly the size of Germany's entire GDP. And it's enough to give all 8 billion, that's with a B, billion people on Earth, $625 per person. Whew. Okay, so Kelly, what does this mean for NVIDIA, and what does it tell us about the momentum behind the AI boom?
Well, if it's $625 a person, that means you can only buy 3 NVIDIA shares, but that might be a good investment because it's just about $200 right now. So look, what this means for NVIDIA is it is just such a acknowledgement and affirmation by investors that they are the main driver of this AI revolution, right? They make the chips that drive everything. And so we talked about that conference yesterday that really spurred this uptick in the stock. And I think it's not only the announcement that CEO Jensen Huang made, and the number of announcements that he is partnering with a number of different American companies, that he has the Blackwell chip, which is the most advanced chip that NVIDIA makes, made now in the U.S., a good portion of it. But it's really about that meeting that was happening today between President Trump and CEO Jensen Huang, and the hope that NVIDIA would be able to sell their most advanced chips to China. That's something that they haven't been able to do at this point, but clearly by investors pouring money in, they think that they're going to be able to tap into that very significant revenue source from China that in the past few months has really been cut off for NVIDIA.
Kelly O'Grady. Kelly, thank you.